Joining us once again is a good friend of the program, Thomas Frank. Tom Frank is, of course, the author of What's the Matter with Kansas? Listen Liberal, and his latest book, which is, let me get the title exactly right, Rendezvous with Oblivion, Reports from a Sinking Society. I do think that's an eye-catching title, and a lot's been going on in the political world, so I'm looking forward to our conversation. So first of all, Tom, thanks for coming back on the program.
Richard, it's my pleasure.
Secondly, so I guess you're immersed in a new book right now, right?
Correct. Yeah. Working on a book about populism. This was my original subject, my first love when I studied history, way back when in the 1980s. And I did a lot of primary reading on populism. Like I read their old newspapers. I remember I spent one Christmas vacation at the Kansas State Historical Society reading populist scrapbooks and things like this. That office, by the way, is now Chris Kobach's. The Kansas State Historical Society is now Chris Kobach's office.
Well, I would say something like the Visigoths have taken over the temples, but I've been reading some revisionist history that suggests that we've been too rough on Visigoths in recent centuries. But be that as it may, I think it's a fantastic subject, and obviously I'm not going to ask you to talk about a book you're still writing, but I will comment about the populists. These are, of course, the agrarian populists. This is not. Nowadays, the media in particular like to use the word populism in a pejorative way to mean Donald Trump and people who follow Donald Trump, and then maybe a couple of crazy, in their view, leftists. But you're talking about
that's right. I'm talking about the real deal in the 1890s, and the word has come down to us, and the meaning is, the meaning has changed slightly over the decades, but it wasn't all that long ago. It was in the 1990s that populist was a positive term. It was not pejorative, and people tried to describe themselves that way. They thought it meant that you were down with the people, that you were a regular person as opposed to some kind of highbrow. But Trump and combined with people like Marine Le Pen and Viktor Orban in Hungary have really given it a bad name.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering, it's a happy accident, assuming it is an accident, for the sort of elite forces that are resisting significant change from the left as well as the right, and primarily from the left, I would argue. It's a happy accident for them that the term has become pejorative, because it means they can it helps them in their ongoing effort to dismiss valid, left critiques or populist critiques of the current system.
Yes, that's exactly right. Do you remember Al Gore's campaign in the year 2000? And he had, for a very short time during the year 2000, Gore ran under the slogan "The people versus the powerful," or it was something like that. Do you remember this?
Vaguely, yes, I do.
Then he lost. Okay, and we all remember the awful scenario where he won the popular vote but lost the electoral college thanks to Florida, and all of the sort of wise men in Washington D.C. blamed his failure on the fact that he had used this populist slogan for a very brief period. It's like that. Oh, we know what the problem is. It's that for a very brief period, you were suggesting that maybe the Democratic Party should be on the left, and that killed you.
Right.
We could never do that.
Every scenario is retrofitted to suit that narrative that, of course, you must not be a populist. You must not support or aggressively fight for the economic interests of the working class of all races, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now that gets me to something that I had wanted to talk to you about, Thomas Frank, and there are one of many things I'd love to talk to you about, but this is the report that was in Axios, which was put together by I think Mike Allen, who did Politico originally. This is his new venture, and it was Scoop was the headline. Confident Dems plan detailed 2019 agenda. Well, first of all, just before I even go past that headline, I have a general rule of political prediction, which has rarely failed me, which is when Democrats get confident, I get nervous that something bad is going to happen, because confidence seems to have always preceded disaster for Democrats. But that aside, I'm hoping I'm wrong this time around. It outlines, it seemed to be a strategic leak to me, but in any case, it outlines what the agenda would be for House Democrats if they win the House back. And it says, first of all, rhetoric, and before we get to to context and content, rhetoric. We are ready from day one to fight for the people, said an aide involved in the planning. I mean, fine, fighting for the people is a good idea. The national campaign theme, you remember A Better Deal? Remember when there...
that was one really bad slogan.
Wow, was it bad? It was like, the implicit in it was, hey,
those guys are bad, but we're not quite so bad.
Right. Hey, it could be worse.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a total loss. I mean, these are other things that were thrown. So they've ditched a better deal, apparently, for the people. What do you think of for the people as a slogan?
They are very slowly inching their way towards their populist, destiny, their future. They're dipping a toe in the water here. They don't want to go, as you were saying before the show started. They don't want to go all the way towards the kind of slogan that the Labour Party was using in England. The people, and or what is it?
It's
the many,
for the many,
few,
not
for
the
many,
few.
not the few. Yeah, which is that's your classic kind of populist formulation. And they don't want to do what Al Gore did in the year 2000, because Lord knows, they learned their lesson from that. But they're very, very, very cautiously inching their way, and they are using the P word, the people. I guess they think that's okay in a country where the first words of the Constitution are "We the people." For the many,
that maybe they're not ready to negate the few, but they are willing to...
Well, the few is them. That's the problem, Richard.
Yeah.
What are they supposed to say? They have a real problem with denouncing the few or the elite or whatever, because that's them. I mean, it's also the Republicans, but that's them.
Well, yeah, and let's talk about that for a second, and then maybe we can get back to Al Gore, because I don't think either of us think he ran a truly populist campaign.
No, of course he didn't. It was just a way of making his loss hurt the people that you wanted to hurt.
Right, of course.
Rather than taking the blame for it yourself, which is what really needed to happen.
Yeah. So let's talk about an example of the Democrats sort of struggling with this issue, because I think you're right. I think they're sort of populist curious to, they're exploring the populist side of their, of themselves, and that's good. That's fine. They should do that. But I think while they're going through this, they're also Michael Bloomberg. I'm thinking of the great blues guitar player,
yes.
Which is a totally...
It's music. We're talking about music before, and now you're stuck.
It's totally forgivable. Any reference to Mike Bloomfield, the great blues guitar player of the 60s, is excusable in my book. But Michael Bloomberg, on the other hand, is obviously billionaire, Republican mayor of New York, has said he's going to donate $80 million to Democratic House candidates this go round. And it's interesting, because then there was an article.
That's some populism right there.
That is cash for populism. That buys you a lot of populism, pal. And what I saw, and this gets to this sort of tentative nature of for the people thing. What I saw a lot of people saying, because then there was an article pointing out the many odious opinions that that Michael Bloomberg holds about, Me Too movement and other things. And I saw a lot of people on social media, a lot of Democrats saying, well, we don't like the way he thinks, but we'll take his money. And the problem is, to me, that when you take the money, you have to make an accommodation with the way he thinks. And that's what's broken the Democratic Party, or not broken it, but certainly held it back all along, in my view. That's why they can't say for the many, not the few, because one of the fewest of the few is writing them a big check. Is that unfair, you think? Or,
No, Richard, that is your reasoning is exactly right. In fact, I would say that you're being a little naive here. You need to take about 3 more steps down the yellow brick road to cynicism, and then we'll. And then the reason that it's even safe for a guy like Michael Bloomberg to give money to the Democrats is because they've already jettisoned the kind of Democratic Party traditions that would make trouble for people like Michael Bloomberg, and so he feels okay giving them money. Taking his money, of course they're going to take his money. That's who they are. They are not only not a threat to this guy, they are. I'm surprised he's not one of them. By the way, he spoke at the Democratic convention too in 2016. He's, the distance between them and a guy like him is very small. In fact, I don't even really. Why was he a Republican? I don't even remember.
Well, he actually.
Is it because he couldn't get the Democratic nomination or something like that?
Yes, it is. But he is a classic Republican in his political opinions, as are.
Well, so are they.
Exactly.
So is the Democratic Party.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
He felt right at home at the convention in 2016. But by the way, that convention was really something else. There were lots of Republicans that spoke, and there were a lot of military types. And, the kind of people who go to Democratic conventions were the same as always. They tend to be people like you and me, people who are very liberal, progressive, et cetera, a lot of populists, that sort of thing. But the people who were on the stage at the Democratic convention in 2016 were very different. And they were a lot like Michael Bloomberg. That was a very common sort of perspective that you saw there from the people who are leading the party.
And the contrast between 2016 and the Democratic Convention and, let's say, 1936 and the Democratic Convention, where Franklin D. Roosevelt, if I remember my chronology correctly, said of Wall Street bankers, "They hate me and I welcome their hatred." There seems to be a need now, not just for money. So wait. So Richard, this time it's like they want to offer me, they want to offer me cocktails, and I welcome their cocktails. That's they want to invite me to their party, and I'm welcome at their party. And that's the convention in 2016. That's the way it worked. By the way, at the Democratic, his acceptance speech in 36, Franklin Roosevelt. That's where he used the famous at the time, totally forgotten today, but he said, "This generation has a rendezvous with destiny." And, talking about the young people coming up in the Great Depression. And I always loved that line. Ronald Reagan, by the way, swiped that line from Roosevelt. He swiped many lines from Roosevelt, but he swiped that one and made it his sort of recurring catchphrase. And I swiped it again and put a really awful ending on it, and that's "Rendezvous with Oblivion." Yeah, well, which is what this generation has. And the convention in 2016, that generation had a rendezvous with celebrity because
Well, you're behind the velvet rope, actually. You don't.
Yeah, right. But the point is this, I guess. Okay, let's talk about how we might envision a Democratic Party that was not, I welcome their dry martini, but was one that's, and by the way, that convention, I was there, I guess you were too, was, there were heavily subsidized parties and events from all the big banks and other financial interests and so on. So let's envision.
Oh, those parties are extraordinary. By the way, the Republicans, I always go to both conventions. The Republicans generally have better parties or I always thought they did in the past. But the Democrats are very rapidly closing the party gap. The convention, whatever you want to call those things. But these parties in these held in these really lavish bars and clubs, and the kind of liquor, and it's all free. Everything is being handed out for free. The grade of liquor that they hand out is always better at the Republican gatherings than it is at the Democratic. But the Democrats are catching up real quick.
Reminds me, I forget who said that, they sold out, but their soul was cheap or something.
The price tag was too low.
Right.
They got a better deal.
Thomas Frank. Okay, that was pretty good. I'm gonna have to steal that, I think. But but what I'm trying to do now, and I could fixate on, our next party event will be held above the convention center in the Marie Antoinette room and so on. But
yeah.
But I'm really trying to think here, Tom Frank, about what a different Democratic Party would look like. So Bernie Sanders, my old boss, ran for president, ran in the primaries alone, because he didn't get past the primary process. In the primaries alone, he brought in nearly $250 million in contributions, famously at the average rate per contribution of $27. So I guess one of the questions I would ask, we're coming up on a midterm election. I am nervous. I mean, I'm not at all sanguine about how this is going to go. We're coming up on a midterm election, and Michael Bloomberg, by the way, nobody calls him Mike, but in his publicity materials, he pushed the idea that he was Mike Bloomberg when he was running for office. He's Michael. Michael Bloomberg is promising $80 million. Is there a scenario under which a different Democratic
Party?
Now
we have two Republican parties now,
right?
And you remember all the other Republicans that endorsed Hillary in 2016?
Yes.
That's where we are now.
And the national security establishment, the national security Republican Democratic establishment was all in for Hillary, as one might expect, because Trump was rhetorically challenging their hegemonic control over our military policy and the trillions that go along with it in defense contracts. But of course, they've managed to control that aspect of Trump, if it was ever anything more than rhetoric to begin with. But they were all in for Hillary. Yeah, I mean, we basically have, I don't know if it's probably too conservative. The Democrats are probably too conservative to be Taft Republicans or Eisenhower Republicans, but they might be Nixon Republicans, post-Nixon Republicans.
Well, I was just reading. So, RJ, this is going to be this is a reference you probably won't get, but I was just reading in the paper the other day that Nancy Kassebaum, who was our Republican senator from Kansas back in the day, in the 70s and the 80s, and I think into the 1990s, that the Republicans have nominated Chris Kobach for governor in Kansas, and she in turn has bolted her traditional party and has endorsed the Democrat, and this is something that you could see coming a long way off. The sort of masters of the moderate Republicans in Kansas who ran the Republican Party in Kansas when I was young, eventually becoming Democrats because the Democratic Party has been moving towards them for so many years. I mean, do you remember that one of the statistics that I unearthed in Listen Liberal is that the professional class in this country were once upon a time one of the most Republican demographics in the country in the 1950s and 60s. Your doctors and lawyers and such like would be Republicans, would vote for Republicans, and today they vote for Democrats. That's not because their views of the world have changed. It's because the parties have changed and they're more comfortable with the Democrats. Now the Democrats have moved to them. And that's what you've seen. You've seen that happening all over the place, and there's many examples of it.
Well, and what I was thinking of when you were talking, Thomas Frank, was one of the early signs of this was Christine Todd Whitman. If you remember Christine Todd Whitman, I believe she was a former Nixon appointee to the EPA. I'm not sure about that, but she was Republican governor of New Jersey. And then she began to feel very edged out by the Reagan Revolution after she left office or was voted out. And she wrote a book, I don't know if you remember this, called It's My Party Too. Do you remember that? So she had a book called It's My Party.
I think that was during the Bush years, wasn't it?
It might have been during the Bush years. It's My Party Too, because she felt it was moving too far to the right, which also seems to me like it must have been a Leslie Gore record, but I could be wrong. And
she'll cry if she wants.
And she'll cry if she wants. But I feel as if these Republicans are not deserting the Republican Party and going over to the Democrats, really because the Trump and Tea Party factions are too conservative for them. So, and I don't want to speak, I don't know if that's true or not true of Whitman, but I mean, in general, I feel that it's more because they don't play by the rules of oversight and management that the past elites have been comfortable with, whereas the Democrats do. I feel as if it's not so much, maybe the ideological extremism of the far right bothers them, but I really feel like what a lot of them are saying right now is that Trump just embarrasses us.
Yes, there is. Look, from the reading that I've been doing lately, the way I would put it, and you're on to something there, but the way I would put it is that they understand Trumpism as a revolt against experts and expertise. That's what they think it is. And to some degree, that's true. So this is, look, years ago, a book that I wrote that's completely forgotten now, it was called The Wrecking Crew, and it was about the Bush administration and the Reagan administration and how they would appoint hacks and cronies to run federal operations, in other words, to run these federal operations into the ground. So you look at like Reagan's EPA or George W. Bush's Labor Department, and these departments would be turned over to people who didn't believe in the mission and didn't believe the science, et cetera. And the sort of Washington elites now understand that as that's the Republican project. So that's now clear and obvious to them, but they. And I think there's even some truth to it. What they don't understand and what they can't get their head around is that elites really and truly did discredit themselves. There was an incident, Richard, I don't know if you remember this. It was called the financial crisis.
Vaguely. I heard something about it. Yeah.
Almost 10 years ago, almost to the day. And that was, among other things, a massive discrediting of the sort of expert class. Because here comes Barack Obama, who is the expert class in the flesh, and brought in all of, Larry Summers, et cetera. Larry Summers, I always pick on him, although he doesn't really deserve it, because he was president of Harvard University. And so he symbolizes the kind of individual that Barack Obama surrounded himself with, the very best and the very brightest. And these people did nothing differently than the sort of buffoons who filled the hacks and cronies that filled the Bush administration. You put in the experts and they do nothing differently. And what most people remember about this when they think about the financial crisis is the bad guys got away with it.
Right, and of course they got away with it. Yeah.
But you say, of course, that's not what happened in the 30s. That's not what happened even in the 1980s.
No, actually,
Reagan and George Bush's dad were president. They prosecuted those guys. George W. Bush prosecuted Enron. Really?
Right. I've had William K. Black on this show, who was, guiding a lot of those prosecutions, and is now a great criminologist, lawyer, and economist. But I'm sure Bill Black, but they prosecuted more than 1,000 people under the first Bush presidency, George Sr., for the savings and loan scandal. Yeah, no, nobody went to jail. I don't think that fact is lost. I mean, on the so-called deplorables, it's easy to.
Oh no, they know. Everyone knows it. This is so. I said at the time. Okay, not at the time. So in a book that I wrote in 2012, I said this is the. I'm going to butcher my own quote here, but basically, this is the kind of scenario that puts the public cynicism off the charts. When you do nothing, when you bail out the crooks, this is how you kill people's faith in democracy, and that happened. Richard, that happened. That is exactly what happened.
No, I think that's right.
Destroyed people's faith in representative government.
Right. And so you have not only the sort of white working class flight from the Democratic Party, but you also have the lack of the downturn in turnout among core Democratic voting groups between 2012 and 2016. I would argue for the same reasons. You know, everybody's out there talking about how do we win over, I don't mean everybody, but a lot of political types. How do we win over white working class voters? Well, the same way that you get black working class turnout back up and Hispanic working class turnout back up and get more women to vote for you guys, which is by, you know, a break with the policies that have created the kind of cynicism that you described.
But there's the rub. That's exactly the problem, is that break with the policies. They don't want to do that. They don't want to be the party that does those things. You know, that's not who they are. That's costly. That's, you know, they like those parties. They like they like having the party in the Marie Antoinette room up above the convention center. You know, they like being that Democratic Party. They think they've got a good thing going. You know, the Republicans, they say, look at the Republicans. They've moved so far to the right. We just follow them. You know, we do like Bill Clinton. We follow them at a distance. And we take over their old positions, and we become the Republican Party of the 1950s and 1960s, which is what the Democrats are now. And it's comfortable. It's a nice life if you're a politician in those circumstances. And so that what the one big sort of how would I put this strategic problem for them is fending off challenges from the left. So that's the only thing that could really ruin their day.
Right,
really mess up this whole strategy. So a guy like Bernie shows up, they got to do everything they can to to nip that thing in the bud.
So here's the thing that I've observed with some bemusement, I guess, Thomas Frank, which is that attitude towards the left, the absolute rage and hatred that you would see somebody like Barack Obama or his press secretary Robert Gibbs direct vitriol towards the left with an intensity that they never directed towards the worst Republican politician who would say, the most slanderous things about them. The special hatred for the left that would be interesting to explore. Then you had the contemptuous dismissal.
You just said the word that explains the whole thing, which is contempt. Contempt. Right. And why do they have contempt for people like you and me? Remember the old Clinton era slogan, they've got nowhere else to go.
Right.
They can take you for granted. And that I'm sure there's a simple psychological term for what you're describing, but when the one who has nothing to go on, has nowhere to stand and has no representation demands something, that's something you don't. When someone with no power demands that things be done their way, that's how you confront it.
Right.
That's how you deal with it.
Mixed with a healthy dose of what the old adage called familiarity breeds contempt. But then what they've done is they've created a kind of lock that works this way. If you ask for something, they feel contempt for you because you have no power, because where are you going to go? If you stay home, which is the one place you can go, is not to the voting booth, then they excoriate you, as they're doing once again. Millennials, I remember having on and off the record conversations with Democratic politicians in 2010 where they were just heaping scorn on millennials for not voting in greater numbers for them. And it's like, people don't really respond positively to contempt. It just doesn't motivate people the way you think it, or scolding.
But that's that's how their plan is unfolding. You see that when the whole Clinton plan is the Republicans move to the right, we embrace their old positions, and then look, we've got it in the bag. It's just simple math. The people staying home, that can throw it off. And how do you deal with that without giving those people anything? With moral calumny. What's the word? What's the word that you just used? Heaping insults on them, excoriating them.
Right.
I mean, it's either that or give them something.
Right. Which God
sure as hell not going to do that.
And by the way, it's been fascinating for me to watch the Democratic Party establishment. First of all, they did do a little liberalizing at the DNC meeting, which is good. But it's been
They had a very liberal platform. Remember, they let Bernie and company
because they know platforms
right into platform. Yeah.
Yeah, but platforms don't mean as much as rules do. So if they liberalize their rules, nobody believes in platforms, but right. But I mean, I think that it's been fascinating for me to watch their reaction to something like the rise of the young socialists, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and some of the others who have come up. It's been like a biology class, the films they used to show about the disease cell coming in and to where the healthy the cells try to figure out, do we expel it, do we absorb it, I mean, I feel like that's what the Democratic Party establishment is doing with its left now. It's gone from the open contempt with which they treated a Bernie Sanders to, to for the people as a slogan, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've only got a couple minutes left, but a minute or two, but where do you see this going? Any thoughts or any observations on where it is now?
I think that so. Now I understand your caution about predicting what the results are going to be this fall. I understand that, but things look on paper, things look really good for the Democrats right now. So I'm sure they're very complacent, very very comfortable, which is where they like to be. Now of course this reminds me of how things felt in 2016.
Precisely.
But I don't know what to say. I mean, the public, Donald Trump is pissing people off at such an incredible rate. It would be hard. It would be hard to believe if they didn't score a big victory this fall, and if they didn't follow that up. Now the funny thing is that they didn't want to prosecute anybody when they had the White House and they had the power to really prosecute people who needed prosecuting, but they'll investigate Trump now. They'll do that,
right?
And once they recapture the House, I think they'll take to that with relish.
So I think
that's going to be a lot of fun. By the way,
it will be fun, but I will make two predictions. One is that assuming they do take the House, which I agree it looks good, they will interpret that victory unambiguously as saying that the public has rejected the left, no matter what the polls actually say.
Why? Why?
Because that's in their self-interest to say that.
I know they always say it. I know they always say that, but they have to be a few more steps in the reasoning.
Oh, because they will excise all the winning candidates that are of the left and ignore them, and they will take whatever Joe Manchin or whomever, and they'll say that proves that you have to run, more to the right.
But according to the Washington Post, basically every election proves the same thing, which is that you always have to be in the center.
Well, yes, of course. That's my point.
Meaning you agree with us.
Right, of course. That's number one. That's prediction number one. And prediction number two is that their investigations of Trump will not yield them any political benefit. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say it will be fun as hell to watch, and they won't get any political benefit from it, unless he's actually impeached because there is a clear-cut impeachable offense. But absent that, I don't think it will do them any good. That's my personal feeling.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. But what do I know? They're gonna get his income tax returns finally.
Yeah, I think the embarrassment there will be, as with his hands, that the size of his income will be a greater embarrassment than anything. But we'll see. All right, Troy is telling me we have to wrap up now. So wrap up we shall. Thomas Frank, whose latest book is Rendezvous with Oblivion. It's always great to talk to you, so thanks for coming back on the show.
Anytime, Richard.
I'll take you up on that.